another treat. Got Kim Deardorff. And this guy's got an amazing story. So we're going to start out with his story. He's played since he was 3, and you're a little older than it now, so you're going to play a little bit. He's an amazing guy too. But we're going to start it off a little differently, not with music, but with a story. So please welcome these guys tonight, and we're going to start out with
I'll use it.
There you go.
I really appreciate the opportunity of being here tonight with everybody. David called me up a few weeks ago and said, hey, this is an incredible group of guys that are meeting, and he asked me to come and help him with some music. And then Aaron invited me to share a little bit of my testimony. So I'm going to try to condense it down.
We got nowhere to go for a couple of days.
1964, I found myself in the garbage. I mean, literally in the garbage. I was thrown in the garbage, found in the garbage as a baby in Seoul, South Korea. And I was taken to an orphanage. Actually, the first international adoption agency was started in Seoul, South Korea in the late 50s after the Korean War. And they took me to the hospital. They actually thought I might not be able to see. I had something wrong with my eyes. There was a news crew that was shooting a documentary about the family who started the orphanage. It's called Holt International. And they happened to shoot it on my adopted parents' trip to Korea. So I have this whole thing on film, which is unbelievable. So they flew to Korea, and all the parents adopted, picked up their little kids. During that week, while they're shooting the film about Harry Holt, the founder of the orphanage, he dies of a heart attack while they're filming his story. And we're at his funeral in the film. After the week, we all fly back to America, and I was actually adopted by a couple from Michigan. I don't know how many people are from Michigan. Woo! Hey, here we go. This is fantastic. I grew up out in the middle of nowhere, literally. I mean, hardly, right in the middle. Where was it? Right there. What's that?
What town?
Edmore, Michigan.
Edmore, been there, Midland.
No way.
Yeah, right.
Nobody ever knows anything about it.
You guys have a nice ice cream place.
Yes?
Yeah. Maybe.
So my story kind of starts in Michigan. I'll just kind of condense it down.
Why condense it?
Okay. I'll kind of just say it like it is. I grew up in the middle of basically nowhere. We paid $9,000 for a house and 3 acres. I grew up on a small farm. I grew up with no radio or TV, of course no internet, no video games. And I was the only Korean beside my sister for miles. We went to an independent Christian grade school. I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church. We had no media in our house except for like 10 or 15 records. And we grew up in a very strict religious home, and most of the records were hymns. And so that's all I heard growing up. When I was 3 years old, we had an old upright piano that was probably made in 1900, literally. It was never ever in tune. But I crawled up on the bench and I hit some notes on the piano, and I heard these notes ring. And it was magical. It was mesmerizing. I couldn't even believe what I was hearing. And so I started figuring out songs and just trying to, work my way around the keyboard. Unfortunately, my adoptive home wasn't the ideal. I went through 18 years of an abusive adoption situation. 18 years. When I was 4 years old, I literally thought I wasn't going to survive my childhood. I had nobody to help me. I was in this isolated environment, fully controlled. I was told every day of my life that I was worth nothing, that I would never amount to anything. And this is after knowing that I was found in the garbage, and I was already having issues with that. Music was my escape. I started learning songs off of the 10 or 15 records that we had at home. I actually convinced my mom to move the piano into my bedroom, which is about a 4x8 room. So I had my bed, and I had the piano in the room, and I had about 2 foot of free space to walk around. But I wanted the piano in my room because I wanted to be able to play it anytime I had a chance. I pretty much worked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the summer times when I wasn't going to school, starting from about 6 years old. And I worked a lot. I literally would cry myself to sleep every night because I thought, I have nobody to help me, nobody to speak for me, nobody to understand what I'm going through. I thought I was isolated. I was isolated. For some strange reason, I've always had this overwhelming feeling that God had his hand out for my life. I would cry myself to sleep every night, and I'd pray to the Lord. And for some reason, I just knew that God was going to do something with my life. I left home at 18, went to college for 2.5 years, struggled about my identity. Everybody struggles with identity. I was really struggling with my identity, not knowing where I was from. I realized after coming out of the Adventist religion and discovering a personal relationship with Jesus, that my identity was in him. That changed everything. I also had a teacher at college. He was the head of a small singing group, and he said, "Hey, I'd love for you to play for our singing group." And I had no confidence. I had zero confidence. I said, "I'd love to play for you, but I can't. I'm not good enough." He said something to me that changed the course of my life, and he said, "I think you can, and I want you to play." How simple is that? Changed the course of my life. I tried to get into the music program my 3rd year because I thought, music. I love music. My dad worked in a factory for 35 years of his life, never made more than $6.50 an hour, hated every day of his life. He would come home, lay on the couch, and be miserable. And I told myself, I don't care how much money I make, I'm going to find something that I love. I'm going to just find something I love to do. I'm not going to be miserable the rest of my life. Well, I show up at the music department and the piano professor, and I said I want to be a music major, and they says, I'm sorry, you can't. You don't have any background in music. They offer classical music. They put me on probation for the first semester. They accepted me into the program, then it was going to be 5 years, and they only offered music education. And I said, I'm not going to get paid very much, and I was already getting in debt. And I thought, I'll just go out and work for a little while. All my friends were graduating from college. They were getting married. They had professional jobs. And I'm struggling to hold on to the one thing that I felt like I was made for. I get a call from that music teacher, and he says, he moved to Texas, and he said, "Hey, I'm the head of the music program, and we're starting a recording studio down here." And he said, "I'd love for you to be a part of it. I know you were kind of interested in that kind of thing." And back then, there were no programs for recording, like audio, like college programs. And so I took my $40 and my 2 suitcases, and I rode a Greyhound bus to Texas. I found a place that I could work, that I could walk to and work. I worked taking care of abuse kids for the state of Texas. Made $4.50 an hour, and these kids had a rough life. These kids were really in bad shape. I had 2 autistic children and 2 children that hadn't been potty trained. Had all 4 of those kids by myself for 8 hours a day. Probably the hardest job I've ever had. After that, I go to the music building where they had this room where they're going to put the recording studio, and there was nothing in there. Well, a lady passes away in the community, and she donates $75,000 to the studio, to the school, and he says, "Here's $75,000. Go get some equipment and put a studio together." So I went, researched. I didn't have the internet back then, so I actually had to call people on the phone. I had it all shipped in there. It was sitting in a room, and it sat in a room for 2 months. Just literally sat in a room. I mean, $75,000 was a lot of money to me, and I just didn't have confidence. I thought I was going to screw the whole thing up. Well, a guy came from Fort Worth, and he said, "We're here to do some recording. Do you have any equipment?" And I said, "Well, we got a whole room full of it right over here." I said, "Well," he said, "we need to hook it up and start doing something." So I watched him do something. I watched him hook it up, and then we did the recording, and I started recording from that. Then on out, we actually had multiple Grammy award-winning kids come through that studio, that small little studio in King, Texas. Anyway, okay, I'll zip through now. I haven't graduated from college. I'm struggling to find my identity. I get called to move to California to become the assistant director of an audio production house in Thousand Oaks, California. I spent 5 years there, 4 years in. First 3 years I was doing paperwork and like clerical stuff and accounting stuff, and I'm like, what in the world am I doing here? And the 4th year in, they said, "Hey, we've raised $5 million for doing an animated film, and we want to do all the audio here." He says, "Here's $175,000. Update our studio, and we're going to do the animation." So I bought the equipment. I had to call a bunch more people. Talk to people in Sweden to try to figure some of this stuff out. So we ended up doing the film. I worked with the guys that were recording the voices for The Simpsons that they just started at the time. Actually went with my buddy to take the first non-linear recording editing system to Walt Disney Studios. That's how new this whole technology thing was. So we finished the film, and then they moved it to another facility. It had no studios. I had nothing to do for a year and a half, and I thought, I need to do something. So I got an opportunity to move to Orlando, Florida. They had a brand new top-tier audio post house, just opened. They'd already gone through 2 audio engineers in the first 6 months, and they were interviewing for the 3rd. And so I show up, I take a week off, I fly to Florida, and they explain the situation. They said, "Well, we got to work with you for a week to see if this is going to fit, if you're going to be a fit, and if we're a fit for you." And so I worked with them for a week, and they offered me a job. 2 weeks later, I moved to Orlando, Florida. My first project was a $1 million commercial for Walt Disney World Tower Tour. I was terrified. So the bad thing of it was I had an ear infection. I could only hear out of one ear, and I'm the audio engineer. I didn't think I was going to make it through that first 2 weeks. I ended up working on over 500 commercials for Walt Disney alone. I ended up working on doing all the sound work and mixing for 2 of the films and all the exhibits for NASA at the Kennedy Space Center. Worked on stuff for McDonald's and Nissan, the Discovery Channel. The list went on, and God was blessing my life. I stepped away after 3 years because of some unethical things that were going on at the company, and I had nothing. And within a year and a half, I was making $150 to $175 an hour. I was making about $1,500 a day, working out of my bedroom, competing against multi-million-dollar facilities because God is faithful. The first time I ever contracted with Walt Disney on my own, the producer calls me up and he says, "Hey, we got these 3 radio commercials for Night of Joy." He says, "I'd like for you to produce them." He says, "Give me your budget, give me your quote." I had no idea how to quote these things. I had no idea. So my prayer was, I told God, I said, "I have no idea." I said, "You got to help me." I said, "You set the price and that's what I'll take." So I sent him a bid for $2,500. He calls me back 10 minutes later. He goes, I have a problem with your quote. And I thought, that's way too high. He goes, it's way too low. He says, this is what he said, let me help you. It went from $2,500 to $7,500 in the next 10 minutes. I mean, this is what God does. And I could go on and on about all the other things that God has done in my life. The time that I got arrested and I had a warrant out for my arrest in Texas, and I was supposed to move to California, and I had to go see the judge and tell him, explain. I mean, God is unbelievable.
You can't gloss over that.
What's the reward?
Okay. Well, I was working with this guy in Fort Worth. He had been the youngest producer for ABC Wild World of Sports. He was 30 years old when he was like head producer. He produced the Olympics, for goodness sake, at 30 years old. I think he got let go because he had a drinking problem. So he ends up in Fort Worth. He's doing low budget local commercials, and I'm struggling. I didn't have a place to stay. I was sleeping in my car. I didn't have an apartment. And he says, hey, why don't you come on over and help me do video production, and I'll give you a place to stay. And so I said, okay. So I'm working with him. Well, the 6 months before I worked with him, I worked for this other guy, and it turns out he ends up being a con guy. I didn't know he was a con guy. But I mean, he took me in, and he was super nice to me, and he said, well, we're raising money to do drug prevention. We're going to print these little booklets and give them out to school. And I thought, well, this is fantastic. Well, he convinced me to open up a bank account in my name, and then he ran over all that stuff through there, and it come to find out, we were writing bad checks, and a year later, somebody said, hey, you have a warrant out for your arrest. I'm scared to death. I mean, anybody would be scared to death. And so I turn myself in, I go do the fingerprinting and get the mug shot and the whole thing.
Where's the mug shot?
Oh, yeah. And they set the court date, and I'm just... So I show up for court. Of course, I go to the wrong room. I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh, the right room. So I go to the other room, and they have the whole case load, and they're calling people up, and they finally get to my case, and they say, okay, case number so-and-so, the state of Texas versus Kim Deardorff. I mean, that's the whole state. So I stand before the judge, and of course that was not my first arrest, my own arrest. And he said, hey, look, it's your first time. If you can get the money and clear this up, it's about $5,500. If you can clear this up in 90 days or whatever, get the money, come back, you can apply it to the thing, and we'll dismiss your case. Well, I didn't have any money. At the same time, I get a call from California, and they said, hey, this guy's retiring. He's been here for 26 years. He's retiring. He says, we're looking for another guy to take his place. He says, we think you would be the perfect person. I said, let me think about it. I'm working with this guy. He took me in. I felt like I had an obligation to him. 2 days later, I'm sweating. I wake up in the middle of the night. I feel God's presence saying, you need to take that job. So I call him up immediately the next day. I said, look, I think I made a mistake. I want to accept the position. He says, since you turned the job down, we've opened up the job opportunity worldwide. We put out notices. My heart sank. I mean, I thought I lost this opportunity, the one that God set up for me forever. I thought it was gone. I was sick to my stomach. The one opportunity to get myself out of a financial hole, and I can't get it. So they interviewed people for 2 months, and they finally called me up and they said, you're the last person. Might as well come on out to California and, talk to the guy. Well, the guy that I was going to work with had been working there for 40 years. And he had a reputation of being not so easy to get along with. And also, everybody else that applied had master's degrees, double master's degrees. I have no degree, right? So I show up, I spend the day with him. I don't know, I couldn't read it, I couldn't tell. Oh, for one thing, the recording studio was still using equipment from 40 years before. I mean, it was antiquated. It was like walking into a museum. It was dusty, it had the old machines, it had the old mugs. Come to find out, some of that stuff's actually valuable now. But you know, when God opens the door of opportunity, I've discovered there's nothing you can do to mess that up. There's nothing. When he purposes something, so turns out the guy that retired was Korean. Worked there for 26 years. The guy loved him. He loved this Korean guy. 2 weeks later, they called me up, they offered me the job. They said, "You're board approved. Why don't you come out to California?" No, I got the job. I'm stuck in Texas. I have to call these bail people every week. They want to make sure that I'm not skipping town. So I said, what am I going to do? So I asked to speak to the judge. I go to his chambers. I said, "Judge, Your Honor, you know, this is the situation. I have an opportunity to go out there, have a professional job. I can save up some money and pay this off, but I'm not supposed to leave Texas." And he looked at me, literally, he said, "Well, I can't tell you to move to California," but basically he was saying, "You need to get yourself to California." So I flew to California. Every week I had a call back to Fort Worth to check in with the bail people. I never had to lie that I wasn't in Texas, but I was so nervous, like they were going to find out and send somebody out to get me. Well, I saved up enough money, flew back. I paid off the bill. They dismissed the whole thing. I mean, isn't it amazing what God can do? Okay, let's say one more story before I... So I moved to Nashville, Tennessee in 2000. I worked in Orlando for 5 years. I had thought about Nashville for 14 years. In 1987, I entered a national Christian songwriting competition in Colorado. I didn't win, but I placed third, and all the music publishing people said, "Hey, have you ever thought of moving to Nashville, Tennessee?" Well, my birthday is on January 1st, because I don't know when I was born. They just gave me January 1st. Sometimes you get time to start. So every year on my birthday, New Year's Day, you think about what you want to do for the next year. And I was praying, and it's like God was saying, "It's time to move to Nashville." And I'm like, wow, after 13 years I've been waiting to move to Nashville. It's time to move to Nashville. So I came up here, and an hour before I was supposed to leave, I found a place to rent. And 2 weeks later, I drove my little car up. I left all my clients, I left my church family, I left all my friends, I left all my income, I left all my security in Orlando, Florida, and I moved to Nashville, Tennessee. Because I felt like God was having me move here. And I had no idea why. 13 years before, my main goal for moving to Nashville, I wanted to be a songwriter. You know, all those years I was growing up and my mom telling me how much she hated my music. She literally hated my music. I wanted to have a song in a book that I could show her and say, "Mom, I've done something. I was successful. You weren't right." I was. But after 13 years of waiting to move to Nashville, Tennessee, my whole attitude about moving had changed and shifted to whatever God wants for my life. I don't really care about all that other stuff. So I moved here, Nashville, Tennessee. First 18 months I'm here. I cold called probably 185 producers, studio owners, video houses, audio places. I went to social group, professional group meetings and tried to network. 18 months, nothing. 18 months. That's very hard on a person emotionally and financially. I had 3 opportunities to move back to Orlando, Florida. My client had just landed a national account. They said you could have the whole thing if you just moved back to Orlando, Florida. That account alone was worth about $150,000 a year. So was I going to move back to Orlando, or was I going to stay in Nashville and find out what God had for me? I tell you, during those 18 months, I went through depression like you wouldn't believe. A couple months I just laid on the floor. I was like paralyzed. And then I realized I need to do something while I'm not doing anything. So I got up every morning, I knelt on my couch, and I just asked the Lord to guide, direct my life. I got in a little car, I started driving. I'd end up usually at the music store. I liked hanging out with music people. Almost every single time I would run into somebody, we'd start talking. I may end up spending the whole entire day with this person, talking about their life, talking about one thing I realized we have in common is pain, hurt, disappointment. It was unbelievable. Almost over a year of meeting people. You know, I found a box of business cards in the closet a couple years ago. I was about ready to toss them, old business cards. I opened the top, I looked inside, and I realized every single one of those cards represented somebody that I got to spend time with. Gold. 2008, I'm sitting in my room, financially going up and down, never had a secure job for the first 8 years. I get a phone call, and this lady from Holt International, she said, hey, we have an event in Gatlinburg. She says, would you like to go out there? Would you mind going out there and representing Holt International, help encourage people to sign up to sponsor orphans? I'm like, why wouldn't I? Of course I want to go. 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in my house, and I'm thinking, I can't go. I don't even have enough money to put gas in my car to drive to Gatlinburg. So I emailed her, and I said, I'd love to go, but I have to be honest, I can't even afford to go drive out there. She FedExed the check for $200. I took my little car over there. I'm sitting behind the table, out in the lobby. So when the people come out, I meet them and explain the program to them and hopefully help sign them up to sponsor children. The head of the event comes out to the table and he says, hey, we're doing a major appeal in the morning. It's about 6,000 people there. He says, would you like to help share your testimony and maybe encourage some people to sign up? I said, sure. He said, we're meeting at 10 o'clock. So we met at 10 o'clock. He took me around the upper outside of the auditorium. He opened this window. There was 6,000 chairs. And we get to the back of the auditorium. He goes, so what do you do? And I said, really not doing much. I kind of feel like God maybe encouraging me to share my testimony. I said, also, I brought some of my CDs. He goes, oh, you have some CDs? I had about 110 CDs. And he says, hey, I have a great idea. He was a marketing person all the time. He said, why don't we offer your CDs as a premium gift to help encourage people to sponsor children? He said, would you like to do that? I said, well, yeah, I'd love to do it. I only have 100 left. Well, I was already 2 months behind on all my bills, every single bill. 2 months. I was about ready to be 3 months behind on all my bills. I had just walked through the room where all the speakers and the singers and the artists were selling their books and DVDs. I literally saw stacks of cash on the table. And he was asking me if I would donate my CDs. What happened next is something that only God can do. I get invited to the stage. I'm terrified. 6,000 people. I'm not a public speaker. The Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit. They had a record number of sponsorships that weekend. He comes to me on the last day, he goes, hey, look, he says, I have an idea. He says, I want you to join our tour. He says, we're going to do a fall tour. We're going to finish up the fall tour. And then we have a 21-day Christmas tour. And then we have this thing called Youth Extreme. It's going to be about 30,000 kids at the Youth Extreme. And he said, then we're going to finish up. He owns this tour. He says, then we're going to finish up in the January through March. He says, we have this thing called Winter Jam. He said, I want you to share your testimony at Winter Jam. 73 cities, 6 months later. Auditoriums of 10 to 15 to 20,000 people a night. I'm a musician. I'm not playing music. And one thing I realized is that God can use anything if you're available. They would do 2 hours of the concert and then my section of the program. They had a $3 million lighting system, $1.5 million sound system. It was just energy for 2 hours. And then it was me. I would be literally physically ill every night. But I'd find a place in the arena. I'd kneel down, and I would just pour my heart out to God. And I would close my eyes, and I would not feel comfortable taking the stage until I could visualize Jesus standing at the microphone under the spotlight. There were nights I would speak, standing ovation, 20,000 people for speaking. Another thing I realized, one of the acts on the tour was Toby Mac. I was with Toby Mac the night he won his first individual Grammy Award. Something that I'd always wanted and coveted ever since I was a little kid. I realized I was surrounded by everything I ever wanted to be. And God was using me to speak. All I can say now is I'm a professional video editor at National Religious NRB TV. Been doing that for 7 years. I never thought I'd be into video. Started that whole career at 47. Oh, real quick. At the end of the tour, they invited me to keep going on the tour. Something, I prayed about it, and God said, no. I got offered a full-time job working at Holt International to be the adult adoptee outreach coordinator. First time that ever had one of those. I had dreamed about working for Holt International since I was 4 years old. I said, I got to meet these people that saved my life. I said, we got to work together someday. I called them up. I did the interview. God said, no, that's not it. I said, wow. 2 full-time opportunities. I went back and sat in my room for another year. You know, when you're a freelance person, I sat in my room. I would never meet people. I literally sat in my room for 10 years by myself. That's a lonely place. Until you discover that it doesn't matter where you are. That God's presence is all you need. So I sat in my room for another year, a full year. I ran out of all my savings. I started selling. I put everything up for sale. I get a call from the president of NRB, NRB Network at the time. He calls me up, he says, we gotta have lunch. I said, okay, so we went and had lunch, 3-hour lunch. He said, he outlined the vision for the network. He said, so, do you want a full-time job? In video? I spent 30 years doing professional audio. I worked with video people, but I wasn't video person. You know, when God opens the door of opportunity, He always gives you the ability to be successful. It's scary, but He always gives you He gives you everything that you need to be successful. I love that. Anyway, I've been there At 47, I'm still single. Yeah, probably something wrong with me, I don't know. I find my wife at 47. I mean, I've learned a few things about waiting. I mean, some of my greatest Bible heroes are Moses. He looked at sheep for 40 years of his life. The prime of his life, he's looking at sheep. Joseph. You know, when God moves, it doesn't take long for Him to take you from here to there instantaneously. You bypass all that other stuff. That's amazing. Anyway, tremendous blessing to be here tonight. I just want to thank you for the extended time I talked. I hope it wasn't too long.
Yeah.